I'm Wendy Capewell, an experienced counsellor and psychotherapist. I work with so many people who feel that they're the only ones struggling with the issues that they share with me. Possibly, like many of you, they feel so alone. And so the aim of this podcast is to talk to guests who have their own stories to share, their experience of the struggles that they've been through, or maybe they're continuing to live with, offering their insights as well as their inspiring journey. So let me introduce my guest.
I've got Mark Urry with me today. We met years ago now in a Facebook group, and we lost touch. But I found him on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. There's so many interesting people on there, and I suppose it's changed from what it used to be like. It used to be very much you put your CV on there, and that was it. But now it's got very much of a community, and I suppose there's such a mixture of people on there. So I quite enjoy interacting and meeting and reacquainting with people. Mark is the owner of Emotional Solutions. So Mark, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Wendy. So my company's Emotional Solutions, and as the title suggests, I think when I thought of the title, thinking, what is it that I actually do? And realised that the one commonality between all humans on this earth is actually emotions. Now, I don't come in and say that we have emotions and feelings. That's a whole different sort of conversation. But primarily I work with one-to-ones. So I work in a structured way. A 10-week program, individuals looking at their triggers of their anger, how triggers of emotions. We talk about anger shortly, but trigger of all emotions. How that can be expressed in both positive and constructive ways, and also in negative ways, and ways of which things can impact the way we interact with the world, with our partners, with our boss, and with society as general. Yeah. And then we sort of look at little parts of, tips of how we can communicate ourselves as well in a clean and effective way. And ultimately just be able to take responsibility and accountability for ourselves by having that control over our emotions. And then we can express ourselves in clean ways. And I found in doing that, what that enables people to do is to, once you're aware, then you can start to take control. Once you have that control, then you can repurpose that energy that you've put into maybe aspects of your life that have been unhelpful or negative, repurposing that in a positive and constructive way. That's what promotes self-esteem, purpose, confidence, assertiveness, all the good things that get talked about, but can be difficult to achieve. And through that, the ultimate goal is, happiness, contentment and emotional ease. What I've found as well is, organizations are just made up of emotional individuals. So I have a passion of working with larger organizations, schools, industries where, how you communicate is particularly in an education environment, and how that can flow down to the young people and across to the parents and carers. So it's really trying to bring everyone together through that emotional understanding of who they are.
Yes, and I think things are changing definitely in the workplace. I mean, we've got for mental health first aiders are being appointed, encouraged in organisations. I think there are a lot more, and I'm not quite sure it's filtered down to schools, because I still hear stories of where children who have who function differently in the world, I'm going to say. So they may have ADHD or autism, or they may have dyslexia, where they're struggling because it's not being identified, or they're being ousted. And I think sometimes, there is that. It's quite rigid. There's a whole different conversation about the education system, but I think there's still a lot to be learned with that. I mean, I certainly, when I was at school, it was punishment and cane and so on. So you just did as you were told, or else. I think we learnt by rote as well, which certainly helped me with my times table, but I don't know about anything else.
Well, it does come in handy sometimes.
Yeah, I was going to say, but that's probably about the only thing that I found was useful. Learnt by rote in that respect. But interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm curious. With you, you've told me the kind of people you work with. Do you find that is a mixture of men and women, or do you find?
It is quite a mixture, predominantly men. Although more and more women are coming forward now, I find that there's no real pattern of understanding triggers, and there's men would necessarily, this would be more applicable to these triggers and women to that, but as a whole encompassing thing of what I do, I found that it doesn't matter from my perspective. I just see an individual, and I work accordingly with that. So yeah, it is across the board, predominantly men, but more increasingly women. I think, particularly as we talk of aggression, and I'm finding that dynamic is shifting. That I'm finding from, well, we haven't mentioned the COVID word yet, but particularly the fallout from emotional mammals being separated, isolated, and then all of a sudden we've come back together and, well, just get on with life, and unfortunately life at the moment is on multifaceted of extra stress, whether it's financial, whether it's work, whether it's society, whether it's our government or the worldwide issues. There's technology's got a big answer to the question. We've got access to everything, and receiving all that information and being able to process that on an emotional level, and being able to control that's the important factor of understanding that we are emotional, things are going to trigger us, that's part of life, but actually understanding that, and through that control, then that's why I found that confidence of people, that they're not going to be overwhelmed and then maybe say or do something that they're going to regret, or it's going to get them into trouble. And it's almost like a reconnection, really. It's also relearning that skill of being able to sit with someone, or just being able to communicate, primarily with ourselves, and then obviously with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, and you brought up the internet, and I think one of the things I'm so conscious of, and I encourage my clients not to watch the news, especially if they are anxious and stressed, because I think the way the news is reported is so sensational, and I feel that I stopped watching the news 20 years ago, because I could hear that I could almost feel the anxiety rising in me when I was listening to this, the way they were presenting it. There was sensationalism in that voice. And I think that causes an awful lot of damage. It's just not reported. It's sensationalized.
It's tough, that sense of self that you've got as an individual, and what do you care about? We've got so many people telling you what you need to care about. If you don't care about this, then you're part of the problem. And actually, there's so many things to care about. It's like, well, we can't do all of this. So it's understanding I always say to people, there's beavers in Canada that are probably endangered in the middle of nowhere. They need people, and who are we to judge someone else that would devote their life to that and not worry about any other aspect of part of society? I think I think unless you've got that firm rooting of who you are and that sense of self, it's easily, as you say, that sensationalism, engagement, people actively post stuff that knows it's going to have a strong reaction in people, both good and bad. So that gets likes, and that equates to financial return. So there's actually an incentive to be more be out there and produce more material that's really going to start triggering people. So it's that sense of control of yourself, of right, okay, I'm not getting pulled around here. I can choose to put my energy wherever I like.
Yeah, but you can see how people are so badly affected if they are in it. If their emotional well-being isn't in the best of places. So yeah, I think.
Well, I call it an emotional foundation. Your whole life is built on that foundation. As an emotional mammal, as we can talk about obviously early years and development, but on quite a simple level, I use like Three Little Pigs, sort of the houses, but actually if your foundation is not firm, or there's a certain aspect of it that is an aspect that is causing problem in your life, then it will always be there, and it might manifest itself in different ways. But actually, understanding that, and through my work, I sort of shore that up with people by giving them that little bit of information and for them to, for that discovery themselves to say, actually, yeah, I can see how I'm being pulled around here and what my triggers are. And through that, I feel people get a more sense of their self and get that confidence to be, actually, I'm not going to be invited to this party now. I can choose to just, just remove myself and live my life and do the things that make me happy and what I'm caring about. It's but not at the detriment of others. That's the big thing.
That's the difference, isn't it?
Yes.
So you told me beforehand that you had been in the armed forces for 12 years. So I'm curious as to how that background and how that part of your career has informed what you do now.
It's I joined the Navy when I was 24, so I'd had a bit of life experience before. I'd many jobs, from bus driving to selling vacuum cleaners. So I've had quite an experience of engaging with individuals on a multitude of levels. And when I joined the Navy, someone told me what time to get up, what to wear, how fast to run, and I responded to that environment, and I did do very well. And the armed forces is all about training. You're always sort of preparing, training, and for me, I've been pushed to the extreme physically and emotionally, sleep deprivation, and once you've been there, then you've got more of an understanding of when things creep up on you, and ultimately, if a situation occurs, you've got to be able to respond in a certain way, whether that's in a certain way. So it's a very extreme environment, and I appreciate it's not for everyone, but it's taught me that actually, there's not panic here. Let's just look at different situations, look at things in different ways, and actually, if I do need to respond in a very forceful way, I can do that, but that's within my control. I think if I respond in a forceful way that's out of my control, that's where problems can occur. And within the armed forces, you might be a bit more leeway within that, but once I leave the Navy and then go to the Tesco's and do the shopping, and I'm, someone in front of me, and there's something that evokes a trigger in me, but actually, if I respond in the same way, then it's not going to be long before I start getting into trouble. So it's given me understanding, but also a lot of control of who I am.
Yeah. So if that gives you, had that experience, so therefore that gives you an insight, in personal insight, so you can help clients with that. Give them that.
Yeah, and like you say, everyone's a unique individual, so they've all experienced life. But I've found that you can put things into sort of 5 categories on that foundation of just time, relationships, your health, your finances, and your work. So we can, again, I like distilling things down to its lowest common denominator to make. I like working simple. I've done many complex things in my life, and many complex mathematical equations that are really not who I am, but in that environment I had to do it, and I did do it. But actually, on an emotional level, there's a simplicity in actually understanding who we are as an individual, and I feel a lot of people, as you say, in society, that there's a sense of, there's a control aspect of actually people are being driven by their emotional responses and not necessarily knowing what's behind that. When I say to people, what triggers your anger, it's the situation, and I say, well, okay, what's the trigger behind that? And I find that knowledge is actually more empowering than trying to deal with the situation, because the individual process that themselves. It's I could give advice and quite specific information, but actually, it's once they understand what's driving that response, I find that produces the most empowering aspect of people.
Yeah. Okay, so do you think that there's been an increase in stress, anger, anxiety more recently? Do you see that?
I think COVID has exposed humanity, and not to sound too catastrophic, but I would say we've gone from a pandemic of COVID, and now that's led into an emotional pandemic of actually it's shaken people. People have been isolated. They've looked at themselves and thinking, well, what makes me happy? Do I want to go back and do this job? And and we're starting to see that in society, whether you call it quiet quitting, the Great Reset, all these aspects of society where people are saying, look, this cannot go on, things need to change. So emotionally, again, it's where do you put that energy? There's just so much space and exposure to the world. It's just, for a lot of people, that's overwhelming, and I've found from that overwhelm, people have it's like an emotional disconnect. It's sort of, people are just pulling in different directions, and I find that particularly working with organizations, being able to work together as a team is something that again is, well, we're paying you, so we want you to work as a team, but actually as an asset, well, you're an emotional human being, and as you say, that there's mental health first aiders, there's a lot of awareness out there. But what I'm finding is companies, it's that how to do that. How do we address this in a way that's actually going to get the most out of our people, and actually not just help them at work, but actually help them personally in other aspects of their life. And so that's my impact within an organization, is just working on an individual level. What the organization does, from my perspective, it doesn't make much difference to me, because I work on that foundation at the bottom.
And I think that was something when I was in working for other people, it was just the lack of understanding that their staff were their most important asset. And you just that was the view. They just didn't care. And I think that is very short-sighted, because it's such a cost, but it's to the organization, let alone the individuals. But I mean, it costs such a lot. Turnover staff, the fact that people are unhappy, they're not doing their best. There's so much involved in that, isn't it? So I'm pleased to see that. I think there's more organizations are noticing and taking notice and doing something about their staff's welfare. So it's just one aspect of being human, and duty of care. It's an interesting dynamic, and it is changing, but there's I find the question is, how do we do that? That's the question that I think is to the point of where a lot of things could change and could be a lot better, but actually a little bit way behind. And but we're moving in the right direction. But as you say, at the moment, there's COVID affected everyone. Nothing else in this world has impacted the world in such a way. And some people, I say, it sent everyone down a rabbit hole. And some people are still down that rabbit hole. Some people have gone deeper. Some people have come out of it. And it's understanding that, there's not one size fits all. So when we talk about our feelings and emotions, it's, being able to understand each other and be able to communicate. And just on a human level, it's just come together, help the fellow help your fellow man and woman, and it's I agree. So you talked about anger, and I'm curious, how do you view anger? Do you see it as a good emotion, a bad emotion? I think that people have different views about anger, so I'm curious what your take is on it.
My view on anger is it's the single most empowering aspect of being human that you can have. Whether I call it neutral. It's obviously what you do with it and how you do with things. If you can express the anger in a positive way, well, that's quite a cathartic and empowering process. And if you understand your anger, I would say that that's the single most understanding part that you can understand, is who you are as a human being. Because as you say, as you grow up, you develop, whatever clothes you wear, what colors you like, all these aspects are developed over time. But anger's telling you that something's not right. It might be that thing that not right, what you think's not right is actually not right in itself. But again, it gives you that context of being able to process that, rather than trigger your anger, get the physical and emotional response, and then maybe say and do things that are unhelpful. But being able to put a bit of time delay in that and actually still get triggered, but actually understand what's driving that, and then choosing the right course of action, for me is the single most empowering part of being human.
I guess the reason I'm asking is because so many of my clients, they're ashamed of anger, basically, the same as crying. They're two emotions they don't like displaying. It distresses them, and I agree. Anger is telling us something, and we can act out or we can act on anger. And I think that's what you've just said. So it's very much a case of that, isn't it? And it's just, okay, what's going on for me? Why am I feeling this way? And I think, but we see too many people acting out, especially on the roads.
I think a lot of people, when you mention anger, it's what we see is the aggressive side of it, and I say to people, in my personal experience, that's not where the massive problem is. It's the passive end. It's the internal part. It's the people that don't say and do things. I lived a lot of my life with my anger and very passive, and I know personally that impact. I suffered with depression in my early 20s, and that was something that took me to a very dark place.
Yeah.
And that was prior to actually joining the Navy. So I didn't have time to think about my emotions then. So that helped me out and pulled me through. But yeah, that passive side, and particularly as I'm sure you're finding in relationships, when you're frustrated with someone and don't say that, well, that energy still inside of you. It's it will come out in other ways, and being able to we use the analogy of being able to vent that, but it's being able to express that, or understand that maybe you don't want to express that, but being able to have that choice and what you need as an individual. That's where the empowerment comes from. But people don't associate the passive side of anger. I done a radio interview a few years back talking about domestic violence, and I said, well, both the perpetrator and the victim are both angry individuals, but their relationship with anger, you could, on a superficial level, you could say, well, one's the aggressor, but the other one's passive. Both the same levels of anger, but just experienced in a totally different way. And yeah, it's that passive side, I think, is the what we're seeing more and more so. And then when we see the explosion, and then, oh, okay, I've worked with people to say, well, I don't shout and scream, or I only shout and scream once a month. And I say, well, what do you do the rest of the month? The anger's there. It's just it gets to that point where it then comes out in an aggressive way. And unfortunately, when we're at home and in partners and relationships, we can feel a little bit more safer, and unfortunately, things can get expressed. All your frustrations at work when you come home, your boss has been saying things, building up, you come home, shut the front door, and then unfortunately, that's your perceived safe space, and things can start getting problematic in the way of relationships.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is. You're right. It builds up, and then it spews out, and it's that phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think it is. It builds up, and instead of being able to disperse it in a healthy way, it builds up and then it spews out in some way. And
it will come out in other ways, and I think understanding individuals that just because you hold it in doesn't mean that's it. You can contain that. It's a powerful thing, and it will come out.
Yeah, and I think I see it so often in couples because they're upset and distressed, but instead of looking at themselves and seeing what's going on for them, they spew it out onto their partner, and it's their partner's fault, or the way the partner's behaving, or you're sulking, or stop tantrum, or and they
look how you've made me feel. It's
hold on, why am I feeling like this, and what's it about me, and why can't I accept that my partner doesn't want to talk right now, that they've had a bad day and they need time to just process it and calm down. But then the partner who is not speaking needs at least to say to their partner, look, I've had a shit day, just leave me alone for a little while. It's not you, I've just had a bad day, I just need time on my own to be able to deal with it. So it's all down to communication in my view, but
everything
often, but
that's it, that the communication with yourself, of understanding, and then actually communicate. Like you say, well, I think within relationships, particularly after the phase of the excitement of finding out about someone else, then the less you communicate, the more you assume.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You're breaking up a bit, but we'll carry on. Yeah,
those assumptions.
Yeah, you're breaking up a bit.
You're a million miles away. You broke. Oh no, back again.
Yeah.
But it is ultimately that, Wendy. That communication is key. Without it, problems are going to occur because you're filling in the gaps, and if you're not filling, from your assumptions, and as you say, a million miles away, and I didn't realize that's how you felt, or communicate your needs. Take responsibility. I'm all about that personal accountability. You're the most important person in your life. you know, and I'm the most important person in my life, above my wife, above my children. And some people say, well, no, I've had children, I've got to be, you know, subservient to them and their whim and their way, and say, actually, you know, I'm a better dad, you know, I'm a better husband through, you know, some people say, well, that's a bit selfish now, isn't it? But, you know, having lived the other side, I've realized that actually they didn't get the best version of me or the best part of me. And actually just taking responsibility for myself, I found that, you know, my relationships have improved tenfold.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic.
Ourselves first. We can't look after anybody else. So that's what
No,
I'm reminding people, you know, it is, you know, I often tell the story, I'm sure you've had it a lot of times. What did they tell you when you're on a flight? What do they tell you about the oxygen mask? And some people go, I don't know. Oh, they tell you the oxygen mask comes down. Well, and I think, well, you haven't even watched it, fine. But who do you put the oxygen mask on first? Oh, well,
yeah,
I come to my child or my part. Well, how does that help them? And they sit there for a couple of minutes and go, oh, yeah. So, well, if you haven't got the oxygen, how can you help somebody
yeah,
else? Oh, okay. And then they get it. And that's basic. If we haven't got that oxygen, if we haven't got that, we have got that self-care, then we can't be any good to anyone else.
no, no, no.
Yeah. So we've had a great conversation. And I'd like to ask you before we end, what is one tip that you could suggest to the listeners that maybe they could take away or something they might think about?
Mm. I found with individuals, you know, again, working at that foundation, I think there's a lot of, you know, what drives everything that we've spoken about is ultimately feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and powerlessness. You know, and what I say to people is, you know, you've always got choice. You know, you've always got control of what you've got control of within your world. You know, what you say and what you do are always within your control. You know, and being able to take control of that in a world that is out of your control, you know, that's the empowering process. You know, whatever your situation is, you know, there is always a choice. You know, there's consequences to those choices, but there's always choice.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want people to ever feel that, you know, to get to that point where, you know, they're just going to give up and think, actually, there's no way out of this. There is always a way out of it. But the only way, unfortunately, is to go through it.
Yeah.
And that's where me and you come in to help guide these people.
So that's great. Thank you, Mark. I've really enjoyed listening to you and what you do and having a different perspective. It's always fascinating when I talk to other people. So I'm glad we reconnected.
No, thank you, Andy.
Um, I'm going to put all the details, all your contact details in show notes so people can know how to contact you and learn a bit more about you. But what's one easy way that if people are just listening, one easy way of people contacting you?
I think the easiest way is just go take a look at my website. You know, I'm advocating technology, but yeah, just emotionalsolutions.co.uk, and it just gives me a little bit more information about what I do and how I do things. And from that, obviously, email and telephone. You know, again, there's a lot of shame and blame around our work, but everything's informal. And as you can see, I'm quite a friendly person. I don't bite too hard, so yeah.
That's good to hear. Well, thank you so much again. I've really enjoyed today, so thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Wendy.
I hope you found this episode interesting as well as helpful. Do get in touch if you would like to learn more about working with me. My email address is info@wendycapewell.co.uk. Take good care of yourself. Until next time.